I am the staunch believer and supporter of the United Nations because governments have never signed a piece of paper that is so Gandhian and so peace-oriented. It says basically in the preamble that war shall be abolished, and it says in Article 1 that peace shall be established by peaceful means. And then the whole construction of the charter is that you shall have done everything with civilian, diplomatic, economic means before you even touch a gun. Now, you can say the first task we all have is to become decent members of the UN and follow international law. Very few countries do. They're all violating the Article 1. And secondly, we have to discuss how we reach global governance, a global democracy, not just national democracies. Something we should really think about is how is it possible for a few bullies to continue against international law, against all human rights conceptions, against all decency, against all ethics? There's always been a fault or wrong thinking in the theory of democracy in the sense that we vote on somebody to do for us what we think should be done. And then they do something else. That's why the confidence or the trust in politics in the Western world, by the way, in contrast to the trust of the Chinese people in its government, is very low. I mean, it's about 30% of the people in the United States who have a trust in the government. The same applies to European states. Now, how many active party members is there in Western countries? Somewhere between 1% and 2%. Now, if you go to China, 7% of the people who are members of the party, almost 100 million people. There's so many things to be discussed about Western democracy and why it doesn't work. The terrible thing about the time we're living in right now is that war and violence, militarism absorbs people's minds. And we never get the time for debating ideas, long-range reforms and changes. We never get there. There's no surplus energy in the people and in politics and decision makers and among experts to discuss what should we do in 20 or 30 or 40 years? What world do we want to have? Because we're so absorbed with what happens right now and how terrible it is. That is something everybody who wants change in the world should think a little bit about, how to balance between being critical and concerned about what happens right now and be constructive. The focus on ceasefire is very human, very understandable, but it's not enough with a ceasefire. You should tie a ceasefire somehow to a structured negotiation. If you ask me, idealistically, I would put the United Nations down there with 300,000 or 400,000 troops, disarm everyone, including Israel, Hamas, and everybody say, okay, now you sit, put them in stores and say, until you have come to a solution, these weapons cannot be used. But what the US does, everybody can see that they are doing nothing but making things much worse. Whenever you pour in weapons and ammunition, you don't even just kill people or legitimate the killing of people. You also make solutions impossible. And therefore, from a civilizational point of view, it is utterly destructive what the United States, Britain, and others are doing, and the whole support of the European Union and Mrs. von der Leyen just for Israel. The cynicism of that is as cynical as arming Ukraine and having Ukraine's young men dying for a NATO goal that is to crush, defeat, split up Russia, which is not going to happen. I see the West cashing in one defeat after the other, one moral defeat, one political defeat, one economic defeat, because all these things here make it impossible for us to make a better world. There are all kinds of models for how we could create security with much less weaponry. The question is, how do we get them into a democratic process and see them realized? At the moment, we have a democracy that is stuck in self-destructiveness. And that is, unfortunately, something we're all going to pay a very high price for.